everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my July wrap-up. I am not sure how coherent this wrap-up is going to be because for one thing, in July I still was feeling a little bit slumpy. I read a decent number of books. I completed 9 books in July, which is around my average, so I'm glad about that, but I just feelings wise I was still kind of feeling like I was in a reading slump, and apparently I didn't take very many notes on any of the books I was reading, but also I just have been really scattered for all of July. I was interviewing for a new job and I'm going to be starting that job very soon, and so I just have been a little bit all over the place, not as focused on what I was reading, and I am not sure how coherently I'm going to be able to communicate what I read this month. But I wanted to film this wrap up now before I start my job tomorrow so that I will have it prepared just in case I don't have time later to film this. So, as I said, in July, I completed 9 books and I had 5 DNFs. So one of the DNFs was The Roommate by Rosie Danan. I also DNF'd Peter Darling by Austen Chant, further convincing myself that I don't really like Peter Pan retellings. I also DNF'd Master of Poisons by Andrea Hairston, The Gossamer Mage by Julie E. Zernetta, and Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian. So those are the ones that I DNF'd this month. So let's get into what I actually finished. So the first book that I finished in July was Blood Magic by Tessa Gratton. This is the first book in the Blood Journals duology, which is a YA contemporary fantasy that's supposed to be a little bit horror, a little bit Southern Gothic. It's the kind of series that I don't think I necessarily would have picked up just out of the blue on my own, because a lot of those things don't necessarily appeal to me. But Tessa Gratton is one of my favorite authors and I'm trying to read all of her books. I think this may be her debut, and she definitely has grown as an author since this, but in this, we're following 2 perspectives, Scylla and Nick. So Scylla has lived in this small town her whole life. Her house is near a cemetery, but recently both of her parents died in what the police say was a murder-suicide, in which they believe that her father killed their mother and then himself. And now Scylla's older brother has kind of resigned himself to this explanation, but Scylla does not believe that that is what happened. She doesn't believe that her father could do that, and so she's searching for answers when she is mysteriously sent a old journal that belonged to her father that has blood magic spells in it, and she thinks that this is the key to finding out what happened to her parents. Nick is a boy who just moved in next door. His grandfather had owned the home before that, but maybe has recently died, and so he and his father and stepmother move into that house. And Nick's mother had possibly been involved with blood magic as well, but she disappeared when he was quite young, and he has kind of hazy memories of her maybe doing blood magic rituals. So he has some degree of experience with this type of magic. When he encounters Scylla out in the cemetery at night, trying to figure out how to conduct some of these blood magic rituals that she's found in this journal. And so we're following these 2 characters as Scylla is trying to figure out what happened to her parents, try to figure out how to use this magic, and discovering the kind of family secrets. There are also parts of another journal from a character that are kind of interspersed throughout this, so we're getting some backstory to kind of another mysterious character. And I really just didn't have any strong feelings about this book. It was okay. I finished it, which I guess is more than I can say than for some other books. The only thing that really stuck out to me from this book was that there's a scene where they're at a party, that they're at a high school party. It's a bonfire in a field. There's a barn you know, they're in like the country. And Nick, who has recently moved here from Chicago, goes to this party, and there's a point when I guess I had glossed over the part where they described what he was wearing, but from Scylla's perspective, she's like watching him and being like, oh, she wants to go compliment him on his sexy hat, and I was like, wait a minute, he's wearing a hat. What is happening? And also, in what scenario does someone look at someone and go like, oh, that's a sexy hat? But so I had to backtrack and find out what he was wearing. And this person, he was wearing a pinstripe 3-piece suit with like dress shoes, and the sexy hat was a fedora. And I just like, what? Anyways, that's the one thing that stood out to me. I had to also go check when this book was written. It was published in 2011, so I guess it was written like in the 2000s. And I was like, I guess that explains why a fedora was a sexy hat. But oh my god, I gave this book 3 stars. It was fine. Okay. After that, the next book that I finished was Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. This is the first book in a YA fantasy series where we're following Terasai, who grows up very isolated. She was created by this woman who is called the Lady for one purpose, which is to kill the prince. However, Terasai does not know this and doesn't really know that that's like the purpose that she was created for. The way that she's going to do this is that she's going to infiltrate his inner circle, because the prince has to form his Council of 11, which are these people who are magically bound to him for the rest of their lives. And so she has to go through these trials in order to be admitted into this Council of 11, and that will be the only way that she will be able to kill the prince, because of the way the magic works, he's kind of invulnerable except to the people who are part of this Council of 11. However, Terasai does not realize that this is her mission until it's kind of too late for her to get out of it. And this ended up being very different from what I was expecting it to be. For one thing, it starts with Terasai much younger than I had been expecting, because I think it starts with her when she's maybe like 11 or something, and then we kind of grow up with her through young adulthood. And kind of the arc of the story just was different than what I was expecting. Certain events that I thought would happen like later in the book actually happened earlier, and then it just was like kind of interesting to see that the arc of the story just like went in a direction that I was not expecting it to. I definitely want to understand more about this world. There is a romance in this, which I really enjoyed, and I really liked some of the side characters and like the friends that she made among the Council of 11. I don't know, overall I really enjoyed this. It was another one that I didn't have a ton of like specific thoughts on, but I had a really fun time reading this one. I think I probably will read the second one, and I gave this 4 stars. Then I listened to an audiobook, which was Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen, which is a nonfiction book about exactly what the title says. And it was very interesting, actually. I really enjoyed this one. I don't generally like review or rate the nonfiction that I read, but I did really enjoy that one. Then I listened to another audiobook, which was Raybearer, which is in the Vorkosigan saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is a very long sci-fi series that I think has like 14 books or something in it, and there are various orders in which you can read them, but the order that I am following, this is the second book that I have read in this world. So in this, we're following the same 2 main characters that I was following in the first book that I read in this world, which are Errol Vorkosigan and Cordelia. And at this point, the 2 of them are married. They have moved to Raybearer, which I think is the planet that Errol is from, but is not where Cordelia is from. Errol has recently taken up a very prominent position in in the government when he and Cordelia come under attack by people who do not like some of the decisions that he's making or things that he is doing as part of the governance of this world. And then from there also becomes kind of an attempted rebellion slash coup. They have to go into hiding for a while. They also are dealing with the fact that Cordelia is pregnant and is at one point exposed to a poison that jeopardizes her pregnancy. She is able to use an advanced technology in order to save the baby, but then that creates further complications that just put the baby's safety in jeopardy in other ways. But that child, we know, survives because that is the main character of the rest of the series. So there's that, at least, that you know that the child survives. So in this book, I was not super following the politics of what were happening, and that was kind of the case in the first book too. This series, I just don't find the politics very interesting, but I do enjoy the characters. I generally just kind of like the way that Lois McMaster-Bujold writes her characters. They're always just like very sensible people in like a lot of aspects of their lives, even in their romances. They're very sensible, and I just enjoy that about them. So I was mostly just reading it to hear about the characters, but I just am never super invested in the 2 books that I've read so far in the Vorkosigan saga. However, I am intending to continue on because the 2 books I've read so far are kind of like the prequels to the rest of the series, because I think the rest of the series, for the most part at least, is following is his name Miles Vorkosigan? It is following their son. And that's really the character and storyline that most people seem to love. And so I really wanted to get to those books and get to that point where we're following his character. So I definitely am planning to continue on at least 1 or 2 more books in the series before I really decide how I feel about it, because I want to get to that like main series with Miles. Anyways, I gave this one 3 stars. The next book that I read was Coffee Boy by Austin Chant. This is a little romance novella that is following Kieran, who's a trans guy that I think has just recently graduated from college, and he has the opportunity to work as an intern on a political campaign. And while he's there, he encounters, I think it's the campaign strategist, Seth, who is very prickly and seems very standoffish, but also clearly has a crush on their boss, who is straight and has no idea that Seth likes him. And at first, Kieran does not like Seth either, but eventually maybe develops a crush on him. And this book was probably one of my favorite things that I read this month. It was so cute. I really enjoyed both of the main characters. Seth and Kieran are both kind of like prickly to people, but like in opposite ways. Seth is in a very like austere way that makes people feel very judged. And Kieran is more like, he's just gonna say whatever he wants, and just like sometimes it is, you know, too blunt or kind of rude, but he's just gonna like put it out there and say whatever he wants. So they both kind of come off prickly to people, but kind of in opposite ways, but they end up complementing each other very well. Seth's character is just a type of character that I tend to really like, especially in romances where he's like very self-restrained and seems kind of like cold and standoffish, but then he just like, when he likes somebody, he gets really awkward, and it's just like very cute. And Kieran's character, just, he's very funny. This book like actually made me laugh. There is a bit of an age gap in this romance. I think they're about 12 years apart, and sometimes age gaps are a thing that I don't really like in books, but in this case it didn't bother me because both of them are adults. They're 35 and 23, so no one's a teenager in this situation, so the age gap did not bother me. Although Seth, who's the one that was 35, kept being like, I'm such an old man, like I'm so old, why would you want to be with me? And I'm like, you're 35, calm down, you're not that old, like geez. Anyways, this book was just really cute. I loved both of the main characters and their romance and their whole dynamic. It was just such a fun thing to binge. Usually I don't love romance novellas, but Austin Chant apparently can just write a great novella romance that I really enjoyed. And also I read this as an ebook, which I don't normally enjoy ebooks either, but I am still trying to read more ebooks to get better at liking ebooks. But I gave this 5 stars because it just was so fun and it gave me the warm fuzzy feeling that I want out of a romance. The next book that I finished in July was Realm of Ash by Tasha Suri. This is the second book in the Books of Amba series, which is a fantasy series inspired by Mughal India. But in this one, this is a companion duology, and so we're following a different character. We're following Arwa, who is the sister of the main character from the first book. And Arwa has been raised as a noblewoman. Her mother was Emrithi, which is this group of nomadic people in this world who are marginalized. They have magic in their blood that makes them have this connection to the Deva and can also protect them from other kinds of malevolent spirits. And Arwa has inherited this from her mother, but she has to hide the fact that she's Emrithi, and she has been raised to kind of hide and suppress that part of her identity so that she can kind of rise within the nobility. So she's been raised as a noblewoman in this world, hiding that part of her heritage. She was married to a man who, at the beginning of the book, has recently died in this notorious event where everybody at this fort died except for Arwa, who was also there. And so she has elected to go to live in a hermitage that is meant for widows of noblemen, to figure out what has happened, but also kind of to isolate herself from all of the questions that people have been asking her about what happened, because she doesn't even really fully know or remember exactly what happened. But then from there, oh, it just started raining. I don't know if you can hear it, but it just started pouring outside. But it starts out with her coming to this widow's hermitage, but then quickly moves on to her kind of re-entering society and joining the princess's like ladies, and then kind of being assigned to this like secret mission where she meets Zahir, who kind of like, people will pretend he doesn't exist, but he has this secret mission to hopefully save the empire. Because also this book takes place about 10 years-ish after the first book, and so we're seeing kind of the repercussions and fallout from the events of the first book, and how the empire is starting to crack and crumble because of certain things that happened in the first book. And so Zahir is trying to figure out why that is and how to stop it, and Arwa has been assigned to help him. Okay, that was kind of a rambly explanation for this book, but I really enjoyed this. This is one of the books, between this and Coffee Boy, I started to really feel like I was coming out of my reading slump. I enjoyed this one a lot more than the first book, which I kind of thought might happen for some reason, because it seems like most people enjoy the first book more, and just to be contrary, I have to enjoy the second book more. I don't know. But I really liked both of the main characters in this, Arwa and Zahir. I loved their romance, and I saw some reviews for this where people said that they didn't like the characters because they were very restrained, and I was like, this is why I love them. Both of them are very restrained people for, you know, their own reasons, but I loved the like tension between the two of them, and I just enjoyed their characters so much. Especially like Zahir, again, is a type of character that I just really love, because like he's sad and lonely and scholarly and very self-restrained and like self-sacrificing. Like there is a very specific type of love interest in books that I love. Yeah, and both of these characters are very self-sacrificing. They've kind of been convinced that like their only value in life is like sacrificing themselves, just like throwing their lives at the empire in hopes of helping it, even though and like just thinking that nobody cares about them. But then they care about each other, and I don't know, I just love them so much. I also have seen some reviews of this book saying that people found it frustrating that a lot of the plot is just focused on these characters kind of discovering things that the reader already knows because we know about the events from the first book. And I can see why that might be frustrating, but that did not bother me at all, because I really don't care about the plot that much. And really, I think a lot of the focus on this book is on the kind of internal journeys of these characters, because it's following them as they are dealing with their own sadness and grief and loneliness, but also unlearning a lot of their own like biases or things that they kind of had accepted as like truths about the world, and then learning that they are not as true as they thought, and then also learning to recognize their own worth. And like, I love an internal journey, you know? I like an external journey, not so much. Internal journey, like I'm all about it. So I loved that this really was more focused on that aspect of the characters. There was a part in the second half that was mostly them just like traveling around, and I don't love traveling, so like that part was kind of boring. But overall, I enjoyed this a lot. I gave this 4 stars. Next, I read A Chorus Rises by Bethany C. Morrow. I read this as an audiobook, and this is the second book to A Song Below Water, which is a contemporary fantasy series or YA series that takes place in Portland, in kind of like an alternate version of the world where there are different like magical beings. So there are sirens and there are gargoyles and there are all kinds of like different magical beings. And in the first book we were following Tavia and Effie, and in this second book we are following Naima, who is an Aloko, which is a type of magical being who is known for being like especially charming. And Alokos they live in Portland, Oregon, and in Portland they are all treated almost like celebrities, and Naima even has like a kind of following online. She's a big like social media personality. But Naima was kind of the mean girl in the first book, and in this one we are following her as she's dealing with the fallout from the things that she did in that first book. But we also, you know, get some of her reflections on some of the events from the first book and what her perspective was during the events of the first book. And so in this one, after the events of the first book, Portland has kind of turned on Naima. She doesn't know what to do. She's never dealt with anything like this before, and so she decides to go to her family reunion, which she has never attended before. So she decides to go out of state to her family reunion to kind of get out of town, reconnect with family, and figure out what she's going to do. But reconnecting with her family ends up being more important than she initially realized, and it helps her to kind of find her purpose. And this book had some like ups and downs for me. The first half of the book, I was not sure how I was going to feel about this, because Naima, she's just kind of hard to like or hard to sympathize with at the beginning of the book, but she really does grow over the course of the book. She doesn't, you know, become perfect, but she really finds purpose, and she is a character who has so much like energy and like savvy that when she has a good cause to put all of her like attention behind and all of her effort behind, she can just do so much. And so it's very cool to see her as she grows and she finds a purpose and finds a cause that she cares about, and she's able to turn all of that energy and, you know, ability and savvy towards in order to really accomplish something. So I really liked seeing her growth, and by the end of the book I did like her more, but also just really appreciated her as a character. And I love a character arc. I love character growth. Yeah, so the beginning was rocky because I really wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it, but by the end I really enjoyed this book. And it also deals with a lot of different topics, which, you know, it's the kind of thing that I feel like at this point I shouldn't be surprised that a book by Bethany C. Morrow is more layered than I expect it to be. Like, I shouldn't be surprised. I should expect it to be layered by this point, but it always, she always surprises me. And I actually enjoyed this second one more than the first one, even though I had a little bit of a rocky start with it. But I gave this 4 stars. I thought this was really good. Next, I read Caroline's Heart, also by Austen Chant, which is another romance novella, but this is more of a Western fantasy, kind of witchy romance. And in this, we're following 2 perspectives. One of them is Cecily, who is a witch that years ago she lost the love of her life, Caroline, but was able to maintain her heart. And so she's trying to put together a spell that will allow her to bring Caroline back from the dead. But this kind of goes awry when she encounters Roy, who is a trans man and a cowboy who takes a special interest in her work, in her spells, and her witchcraft. And this was also very sweet. I really enjoyed both of the main characters, and I am always surprised when I enjoy like a kind of Western inspired story, but I really liked the like Western elements to it. I loved both of these main characters and their romance. I think I liked Coffee Boy a little bit more than Caroline's Heart, but this one was also really fun, and definitely a little bit witchy, and it had this very like sweet romance between Roy, who is a very quiet but determined cowboy, and Cecily, who is a witch and kind of like standoffish and prickly, but is also actually very kind underneath her prickliness. So I gave this one 4 stars because I really enjoyed it. The final book that I finished in July was Darling by Kay Ancrum, which is a Peter Pan retelling, which is amazing that I actually finished a Peter Pan retelling because I've DNF'd 3 other ones so far this year. But this is a YA contemporary retelling of Peter Pan, where we're following Wendy Darling, who has just recently moved to the city, and one day she is at home alone when a mysterious boy climbs through her window looking for his jacket sleeve, which had been ripped off his jacket earlier that day by their dog. And after she sews the sleeve back on his jacket, he asks if she wants to go to a party, and she goes with him. And then things get a lot more complicated and a lot darker than she was expecting. And this book was another one that had some real ups and downs. It was kind of rough in the beginning because there are things where I'm like, I don't understand why she went with him at all. Like this is one of the problems with it being a contemporary, is that I'm like a stranger climbs through your window when you're at home alone in a new city and asks if you want to go to a party, which, like, first of all, he broke into your house earlier that day and your dog tried to bite him. He broke into your house a second time now. He asks if you want to go to a party in the middle of the night, and you're like, sure, why not? Like, who does that? I mean, I'm sure there's someone out there in the world who would do that, but it just seems bizarre to me. So it just, like, premise alone, I'm like, what? But then as they go through, like, he keeps, you know, taking her to different places around the city, And you start to get the feeling that Peter may not be as, you know, as nice as he appears, and that people start telling Wendy that now that she's in this, she can't leave. Something important is going to happen that night, and she's not supposed to be there, but now that she is, she can't leave, because if she does, it's going to throw everything off, and they've been waiting for this for like months or years. And so she is kind of like trapped in this situation, even though things are becoming, you know, progressively more dangerous or concerning. But the thing is, they keep saying that she can't leave, otherwise like Peter's going to do something, but the whole time I was like, what's he gonna do? Like, do what? But later on, you find out what it is he would do, or other things at least that he's done, and it makes more sense. But for a while, I was not that convinced. However, Kay Ancrum has a way of writing that just propels you through the story. And so even though I was not really buying into the story and I wasn't super invested in the characters at the beginning, this was the one Peter Pan retelling that I actually wanted to finish, because of just the way, there's something about the way Kay Ancrum writes that just propels me forward, and I feel like I can't put it down once I start one of her books. I think also for me personally, as far as Peter Pan retellings go, I think this worked better because it was farther removed from the original story. Oh, there also is a little bit of a romance in it that I just loved. It was very cute and very like wholesome, and I loved it. But yeah, I ended up really liking this though. In the second half of the book, and especially towards the end, there are some reveals and things that I did kind of see coming, but still I was like, oh my god, about some things that happened. I think that if you're somebody who reads a lot of like thrillers, you probably would not be super impressed by this, but I don't read a lot of thrillers usually, but I did still kind of see coming like most of the things that were happening, or at least like the big twists that happened in this, but that did not lessen my enjoyment. I don't know, I had a really good time with this, and I really enjoyed it actually by the end, even though it's another one that had a rocky start for me. But Kay Ancrum is just an author that I think I can really depend on to enjoy her books. This was not my favorite thing that I've read from Kay Ancrum. That doesn't mean I didn't like it, you know? It was still good. I think I gave this 4 stars. So those are all the books that I read in July. Have you read any of these? I'd love to chat with you about them in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!